experienced my share of thrills and chills as I got older and wiser. I noticed that my thrill-seeking gene had mutated into a thrill-fearing gene, especially when it comes to heights and to speed. And ziplining involves, you guessed it, heights and speed. So I'm just going to come right out and say it. I'm afraid of heights and I'm afraid of speed. I'm scared to death of heights and speed. But here I was in the Costa Rican jungle 7 years ago preparing to zip line, preparing to go fast, to go very fast through the air, preparing to jump off cliffs and fly across canyons. I listened intently to all the instructions that were given to us from this young thrill seeker who looked to be all of 16 years old. Tell me my part again. Just trust me. Now, ziplining through the jungle, that is to say, jumping from a cliff and flying through the air suspended from a wire is something that a lot of people love to do. A lot of people like this stomach in the throat sensation, that sensation that you're about to die, but not me. Not me. I know what vacations are for. Vacations are for resting, not reeling. Vacations are for relaxing, not regurgitating. Ziplining was neither resting nor relaxing. The young man helped me to get into this leather harness, and he said, it's going to fit a little bit snug, kind of like a diaper. I said, good, I'm going to need a diaper. He said, it's easy. You're going to be just fine. Just clip onto the wire, and you're going to place your gloved hand right here, and then you jump and you sit back in your harness. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to be fun. You'll be fine. So here's this 13-year-old looking indestructible thrill seeker telling me that I'm going to be fine. Yeah, right. What if the wire breaks, or what if I crash into a tree or crash into a rock wall? Don't worry, you're going to be fine. Tell me my part again. Just trust me. So many of you know that we're in this sermon series on the great I am sayings of Jesus. There's 7 of them in John's gospel. We know by now 7, of course, the perfect number in the Bible, the perfect portrait of Jesus in these 7 I am sayings. Today we come to John chapter 11, verse 25, where Jesus makes this stunning claim: I am the resurrection and the life. That's the claim. And many of you know the context of those words. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Lazarus went off a cliff. His zip line broke. Jesus comes to Mary and to Martha, and he utters these 3 simple words: just trust me. Sooner or later, you all know this, all of us will stand on this ominous cliff called death. Just like Lazarus, just like the people in every cemetery, there'll come a time where we will breathe our last. These lips that are preaching to you this morning, at some point they're going to go silent. These eyes, they're going to close for the last time. These hands are going to grow limp. Barring the return of Jesus in our lifetime, you will die. So will I. Now, it's not part of the original plan, mind you. Death is not part of the original plan. So where does death come from? St. Paul tells us very clearly, Romans chapter 6, verse 23, the wages of sin is death. We bring this on ourselves. Everyone is a sinner, so everyone dies. No one escapes death. Julius Caesar died in 44 BC. John F. Kennedy died. Most of you probably remember that date, November 22nd, 1963. 22 years ago this month, Princess Diana died. And 42 years ago, on August 16, 1977, who died? Elvis. Exactly right. Elvis Presley. Although I'm sure you can still find people out there who think he's still alive. Elvis died. JFK died. Princess Di died. Julius Caesar died. 2 people in our world die every second. That's about 6,400 people an hour, 154,000 people a day. And do the math, that's about 57 million people on our planet every year die. No one escapes, not one. All the best doctors, they can enhance your life, but they cannot eliminate your death. You can eat healthy food, exercise all you want, pop fistfuls of vitamins, stay out of the sun, stay away from alcohol, and stay off drugs. Do everything you can to stay alive, and you will still die. Jesus, tell me my part again. Just trust me. Why? Why trust Jesus when I am on the precipice of death? That's what John chapter 11 is all about. Why trust Jesus? Well, because he cares. Jesus really cares. There's this Greek philosopher, many of you probably know, Aristotle. Aristotle believed that God was the great unmoved mover. That is to say, God is completely detached from the world. He's an unmoved mover. Wrong. Dead wrong. Jesus is the most moved mover. Jesus cares about death. Now, when you're going through it, you feel as though he is an unmoved mover, that he is detached. That's how Martha and Mary felt here in John chapter 11. Martha says, Lord, if you had been here, then my brother would not have died. And what's very interesting, just a few verses later, verse 32, Mary comes along and she says the exact same words. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And many of you, most of you, you know that feeling. Lord, don't you care? Where were you? If you had been here, my brother would not have died. You see, the one man who could have made a difference didn't. He didn't even make it to the burial. There's something about death that makes us accuse God of betrayal. If God were here, then there would be no more death, we claim. If God is God anywhere, then he has to be God in the face of death. Pop psychology, it can deal with depression. Pep talks can deal with pessimism, and prosperity can handle hunger, but only God can deal with our ultimate dilemma, death. He has to be God in the face of death. If not, well, then he's not God anywhere. Lord, don't you care? Where were you? But Jesus does care. Jesus cares deeply. He tells us in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, now this is Mary now, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Troubled, this is the New International Version here, and it renders the Greek word tarasso, troubled. Not quite exact. I get troubled. I'm sure you do too. I get troubled. I was troubled yesterday when I was stuck in stop-and-go traffic on 183 returning home from Carrollton. I was troubled. But this word tarasso, it goes a whole lot deeper than that. Tarasso means to be deeply emotionally moved. It means to have a gut-wrenching feeling. It means that your stomach is doing flip-flops. Tarasso. See, Jesus is the most moved mover. John 13, verse 21, on Maundy Thursday, Jesus experiences again tarasso. He experiences tarasso at the thought of Judas Iscariot betraying him to the Romans. Christ cares about death. Don't let what you see or what you feel or what you hear deceive you. Tarasso, deep emotional engagement Jesus planned for you. Did you know that? Jesus planned for you. Jesus created you. Jesus longed for you. Jesus redeemed you by His blood. Jesus loves you. He treasures you. He really does. Jesus has baptized you. He has bodied you, blooded you, and befriended you. So when you're at the edge of that cliff called death, Jesus cares. Oh my, does Jesus care? Tarasso. John 11 goes on to tell us that Jesus not only cares, He's deeply emotionally moved. John 11 verse 35, Jesus wept. But Jesus is more than just emotionally moved by death. Jesus controls death. John chapter 5 verse 25 kind of sets up this miracle here in John chapter 11. There in chapter 5, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, a time is coming and has now come. Get it? Now. A time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Mary and Martha, they believe in a resurrection, but on the last day. And Jesus says to them, you just don't get it. You're not getting it at all. I am the resurrection and the life. It happens right now. You don't have to wait. A time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God. That's John chapter 11. Hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. No one has ever spoken like this. Jesus Christ has absolute control over death. So you know that Lazarus, he's been in this tomb now for 4 days. It was game over. The Jews of Jesus' day, they believed that if you were dead for 1 or 2 or even 3 days, there was still a fighting chance. But on day 4, it's game over. You're down for the count. The powerful voice of the Son of God speaks into the realm of the dead. And what a marvelous narration of this event. Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. The dead man came out. Christ controls even death. Now, most people don't believe this, really. I mean, and you know that. Most people in America simply don't believe this. They're secular humanists, and secular humanists will come along and they're going to say something like, don't you get it? Human life is just a cosmic accident that happened some 4 to 6 billion years ago. There's no rhyme or reason to life, so get yours while the getting's still good, because when you die, that's it. There's no more you forever. That's a secular humanist. There's no resurrection of the dead by Jesus. And then there would be Eastern religions like Hinduism. They don't believe this either. They believe that when you die, if you've lived a good enough life, then you will be reincarnated into a higher form. Who knows, maybe you'll be reincarnated into a Major League Baseball player if you've done good. But if you're not, if you've slipped up, then you might come back as a dog, and God forbid, you could even come back as a cat. Many people who attend churches like this one, they believe in the immortality of the soul, but they don't believe in the resurrection of the body. They believe that at the point of death, the soul strips itself of the body and enters into this sort of shadow land, hovering around forever as a soul without a body. The Bible teaches, though. The Bible teaches the resurrection of the body. This is not just some pretty sounding words here, not just some religious sounding pills that we can take and so deny reality. This isn't Jesus standing on the sideline of our life looking as though the score is 96-3 with just a few seconds left on the clock and Jesus is hollering out, "Oh, you're going to win." No way, Jose. The resurrection of the body is solid biblical truth that you can count on when you are standing at the edge of the cliff called death. Just ask Lazarus. The dead man came out. When the time comes, I think I'm going to have my wife buy my casket at Dollar General, make it as cheap as possible. And why is that? Because I'm not going to be there in that casket for very long. I believe in the resurrection of the body. Why waste a lot of money on something that you're not going to stay in for very long at all? John chapter 11, Christ cares about death. Christ has control over death. And the Bible teaches, finally, that Christ conquers death. You know the story of the first Easter. The women brought some spices because the body of Jesus was going to smell. They walked to the tomb expecting to see the body of Jesus, and instead, what do they see? They see Roman guards. Roman guards who are scared, stiff, who look like they're paralyzed. Roman guards are so scared that they're lying on the ground and they look as though they're dead. The guards of the dead one look dead, while the dead one, Jesus, is alive. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke all say he is risen. He is risen indeed. And those three words, they continue to shake, rattle, and roll our world today. Not risen from sleep. No, not risen from stupor or slumber. Not risen in the minds and the hearts of his followers. No, risen from the dead, bodily, factually, historically, eternally, and most certainly. The women and the disciples, they didn't picture Jesus as a phantom or a ghost. No, they saw Jesus in the flesh. Jesus had a body. What's it all mean? Well, it means that death is not a pit. Death is a passageway. Death is not the ultimate crisis. Death is a corner turn. Winston Churchill believed that. Churchill had given some instructions regarding his funeral. He said, there should be 2 trumpeters in the balcony of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. When the service is over, one will play taps, signaling the end of the day. And just as he is finished, the other will play revelry, signaling the beginning of a new day. Why is that? Because Christ conquers death. There's this young boy named John Todd. John Todd's parents died in the early 1800s, and as was common in post-colonial America in the early 1800s, when your parents died, the children were farmed out to different relatives. John Todd was given over to his aunt, whom he had never met before, and John Todd was only 5 years old. And just imagine the emotional angst of losing your parents and going to this aunt's home for the first time. Someone whom you've never met before and you don't know anything about. His aunt's servant, Caesar, reassured the young child. Caesar told John Todd that his aunt would have a light on and that the door would be open and she would welcome him with open arms. And sure enough, as they came toward the house that evening, there's a flickering light on in the house and the door is open, and there stood his aunt. She bent down and kissed him and said, "Welcome home." Some years later, the tables turned. John Todd had become a Christian pastor. His aunt sent him a letter informing him of her failing health and impending death. What did John Todd, the pastor, write back to his aunt? He wrote these words: "My dear aunt, Years ago, I left the house of death, not knowing where I was to go, whether anyone cared, certain it was my end. The ride was long, but Caesar encouraged me. Finally, he pointed out your candle to me, and there we were in the yard. You embraced me. You took me by the hand. You took me up to my own room that you had made up. After all these years, I still can't believe it. How you did all of that for me. I was expected. I felt safe in that room, so welcomed. It was my room. Now it is your turn to go. I'm writing to let you know that Jesus is waiting. Your room is ready. The light is on. The door is open. Don't worry, Auntie. You're expected. Jesus, tell me my part again. And you know what Jesus says. 3 words for the ages. Just trust me. Amen. Let's stand and sing, shall we?